Yeah, go for it, Gary.
All right. Thank you, Phil. The best advice I ever got was to recognize that I am built to beat chaos. In fact, it turned into a book. And so many times I've felt like a victim of chaos. And it turns out we're not intended to be victims, but victors. Changes your whole mindset.
That does change your mindset. Well, congrats on the book, Gary. This is fantastic. So today with me, we have Gary Harpst, author of the book, Built to Beat Chaos. We're going to talk about this, biblical wisdom for leading yourself and others. So when did you learn this, Gary, in your career, in your life?
Well, I'm in my fifth decade of being a CEO, and it's been an incredible journey, but it keeps growing, building on itself. And so I'd say in the last few years with COVID hitting, one of our clients was so overwhelmed in the medical industry that they just kept talking about chaos. And I've always been a student of the Bible, believe that's shaped the way I look, my worldview and the way I approach life. And I began studying what the Bible had to say about chaos, and I was kind of surprised, and it was liberating.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, reading your book, and I would not call myself a biblical scholar, but I've certainly read the Bible a couple times, and studied others as well. I think a lot of interesting stuff in the book. One of the things, though, that I think we need to start with, Gary, is define chaos. What does chaos mean in the terms of what you're talking about?
Well, chaos, if you really go back to the first time it's discussed in Scripture, it's just raw material from which we can build things. And so I know it doesn't always seem to exactly fit that definition, but most of the time when we feel like things are chaotic, we have choices in front of us. We feel like we have too much to do, but in that chaos are opportunities. And the only way to really get control of chaos is to get your purpose very clear. And I use the example of when I built a house out in the middle of the woods. They brought truckloads of materials and they just all sat there and looked in a big mess. And then a guy walks up with a blueprint, and all of a sudden the mess starts to make sense. You know what thing to work on next. So this relationship between chaos and purpose is really critical to understand. Chaos is not an enemy. It's just a set. It's a set of circumstances which you need to figure out what your purpose is, so you know what to do with what all that raw material.
That's so interesting. I've never heard chaos quite described that way. When I read the book, I read that and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Just the raw materials that need a purpose. Okay, that makes sense. So is it because people see chaos as a bad thing, Gary, that more people don't embrace chaos, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think chaos comes on us, creeps into our lives, and for various reasons, and we tend to react to the chaos rather than putting our energy in. Well, wait a minute, what's my purpose? Sharpening my purpose, and this has really helped me a lot. I mean, I'm after all these years, I wake up in the morning, and I'm not one who believes in retiring. That doesn't make sense to me. I want to use everything I've learned for the rest of my life. And so I wake up in the morning and think, oh, there's too much to do today. And I sort of have this little bit of overwhelming fear creep in. And then I stop and say, wait a minute, this is a sign I'm not clear about what I'm trying to get done today. And I pause and I think, and I begin to take control of the chaos by saying, this stuff doesn't matter. This stuff doesn't matter. So I'm not going to let you have control over me. So
I like that. So chaos and purpose allows us to better focus in on what's really important and to kind of discard that which isn't important. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right.
Okay,
and
great.
So you want to view the symptom of this sense of being closed in by chaos as a sign to think a little more about your purpose.
Yeah, to get more clear on that. That makes sense. So with that, give me something practical that a leader can do to actually start making that order, other than, I mean, you said look at your purpose, but that seems so big.
Yeah.
So let's zoom in a little bit and make that a little more tactical.
Well,
A little more practical.
I'll take a very real example. When I first began thinking about this for the book, was a client we had in Chicago who does healthcare, and they serve an underserved population in the south side of Chicago, and COVID hit, and their phone rang off the hook. The number of phone calls was overwhelming, and the amount of service requests were overwhelming. And so they were literally in chaos. There was so much to do, they didn't know what to do, and it exhausted the employees. And so I'll just give you one tiny example of bringing order out of chaos. Was because they couldn't answer the phones, people would call back. And it got into a trap, a cycle that they couldn't beat. So here's an example of clarifying chaos is we need to do whatever it takes to answer the phone. Quit focusing on the rest of the chaos. Get that one item under control. And if you get that under control, then the number of calls will go down, and we'll have a clearer picture of what the demand really is. That's an example of fighting the chaos by picking one thing and say, we'll start here and get control of this. And by doing that, you give people permission. Okay, don't worry about this other stuff. We'll get to that later. It's not that the problem is still there. It's just your focus is narrowed to something you can do something about. And that feels less chaotic.
So did it take you to go in there and help them? Or why can't, if so, why does it take an outsider, if you will, to sometimes see what's inside that? Because that seems so obvious, right?
Yeah.
Like answer the phone.
Yeah. Well, yes, it's because no one person felt like they had the authority to do it. That's part of it. And in general, the human condition is we get overwhelmed and lose perspective. And so, I'll give you an example. I know I should work out to be more fit, especially at my age. And yet I still hire a coach to force me to do it. And so that's the example in an organization like this. You need somebody that's not in the fire just to say, wait a minute, are we missing the obvious here? And so that's what's good in our life about having a spouse, having a friend, somebody who just says you can be open with, and then they can ask a question. You say, oh, yes, that's pretty obvious. Why didn't I think of that?
Yeah. Sometimes we just have to be outside, have that authority, permission, whatever that is, in order to help that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. So with that, the subtitle of your book is Leading Yourself and Others, which is interesting to me. So talk to me about leadership, Gary. How is leadership a self thing?
Well, again, I bring a biblical perspective. I don't. Everybody believes something that shapes the way they think about the world and the way they interact with people. And there's a premise in the Bible that we're designed to overcome chaos, to bring order out of chaos. And so cooking a meal, my grandmother is bringing order out of chaos because there's 1,000 ingredients in the cupboards, and she picks up certain recipe and creates a feast. Well, there's great satisfaction in that. There's something inside of us that we're designed, that when we do what we're designed to do, we like it. And so the self-leadership is the Bible talks about 4 components that are inside of us. One is our heart, our source of desire, our mind, which gives us reason, the ability to say that desire might not lead to a good place. So you've got desire, reason, you've got imagination, which I don't know who first coined this phrase, but imagination, when you take your heart and your desire and your reason, you eventually create in your mind something you want to work on. Oh, I want to build this house. And you start to get a little teeny picture in your house, or whatever it is, the meal you're going to fix. And then that leads to action. This sequence is how we as creatures were designed to bring order out of chaos. First, you figure out what you want, then you figure out what's wise, and then you start to imagine what you're going to do, and then you do it. Okay, so self-leadership that was kind of a long answer. All this to set up what self-leadership is. Self-leadership is when your desires and your reason and your actions all line up. And if you have inner chaos, there's a chaos inside of us. When I say I want this thing, I want to be fit, and I keep eating ice cream every day.
Right? I love ice cream, Gary. Come on.
I do too. I just had some, and yes, and so I remember one of your other podcasters said he loved chocolate covered peanuts.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. Well, self-leadership, to really have internal peace and be a good self-leader, you have to be good at sorting through what do I really want here. Am I approaching what I want? Is what I want a good thing? Is it aligned with the world? Is it going to work? Because I want things that aren't going to work. And so I have to have some reason to pursue that. If I get those things lined up and then I go to work on it and start to fulfill, then I have a peace and an internal solidarity, which is what we call self-leadership. Well, if you're building a team of people, you start to need to eliminate the chaos between you and me. And so it starts, if there isn't peace within you and within me as individuals, it's hard to get peace as a group.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? Because I've got my purpose, and you have yours, and unless they're the same, we end up with conflict.
Or at least compatible. And there's not just one purpose. I mean, you are a single person, and then you kind of have this, you've learned who you are and what you like and what you don't like, and I want to be an engineer or whatever. Then you perhaps get married, and then you realize, well, I've got these desires, but I'm now part of another unit, if you will, a husband and a wife, and you have to make sure your purposes align with your spouse's, and together you may have purpose of raising a family or whatever. And so this purpose crafting, if you will, or alignment is not a once and done thing. It's you're continually trying to say, does my purpose align with the key associations that I have? So if I come to work for you and I want to be an engineer and you want a salesperson, and I could say to you, well, I can do that. I'll do that. But inside, you're not going to like it. You're not going to be good at it. Then you have just made a decision that almost guarantees that something's not going to work long term.
Yeah.
And so if I'm taking money from you to do a job, I should think carefully about, can I really align my purposes within yours to an extent that you're going to get the value?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole idea of a higher purpose, right? We need something more than just, I'm going to get a paycheck. Yeah, we have to align that to something greater. Am I tracking here?
Yeah, you're absolutely getting it right. And that's why the book uses the title, Leading Yourself and Others. If you can't sort of get this stuff straight about who you are, it's going to be a lot harder for you to lead others. And I really like to use the analogy of, in the physical realm, we're so good at technology as a human civilization, we've gone to the moon, So thousands of years ago, we were inventing the wheel. We've made incredible progress technologically. And the reason is technology follows the rules of physics.
Yeah.
And they always work the same. Certain atoms, certain electrons, they have certain charges, and we can design with confidence that those things are going to go together. But when you build organizations, you can't use the chemistry of the world. You have to use the chemistry of human relationships. Now we're into a whole different kind of what leadership means is understanding how to put people together for a shared purpose. So it starts with understanding yourself, and then once you understand yourself, you're much better positioned to work with others.
So is one of the first steps then to building a great organization to making sure that the people that are in the organization are kind of self-actualized and they know who they are and what their purpose is first?
Yeah, well, I back up and say the first step is make sure you know what the purpose for the group is.
Okay.
Because if you don't get clarity about why does this organization exist, what are our values, what are we trying to become, then it's pretty hard to know whether people fit.
Sure.
And so sometimes people worry about getting fit, but they haven't really been clear about what they're trying to fit to. So step one is to do that hard work of who are we, why are we here, what really is important to us as an organization. There's not a right or wrong answer. That's just a responsibility of a leader. And it applies to the organization as a whole, the owner of the organization, but it applies to a frontline supervisor. What kind of a team are we trying to build here? How do we treat each other? And once you've got that, then you can nurture each other, if you will, in building relationships that encourage that instead of tear it down.
It makes so much sense. So in organizations that are struggling, perhaps it's the clarity of the mission more than it is the clarity of the people, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you're coming back to your self-leadership thing. We as leaders often try to give people something we don't have ourselves. And so one of the first things to do in your own life to be a good leader is to get centered yourself. So you have sort of an internal piece and you understand what you're trying to do. Then you can coach and mentor others. But if you've got chaos inside of you, it's pretty hard. You're saying people do as I say, not as I do. And so that being authentic inside, working on the inside, helps you help people outside.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. So with that, Gary, can you give me an example about that self-leadership, how you applied these principles to leading? Like I read your story about how you merged or were bought by Great Plains, right? Which is super interesting because that was one of the first IT projects I worked on 20 years ago, back before Microsoft bought them. So I worked indirectly with you back then, which is super interesting. But tell me how that's played out and maybe how that worked for you personally.
Well, I'll just give one example. I think as a hard-charging CEO, I was a Christian when I started our business, but day one, you're worried about growth and paying the bills, and what good is it if you build a business with this big purpose, but the business doesn't make money and it doesn't, you've got to have what people need more than anything is a stable job and an ability to grow. And so you, as a young CEO, you are focused on how do I make this business successful? And it can turn into a mindset where I see people as means to my end of a business. And so one really big thing to challenge yourself on is that the value I see? Is the primary value of this business to generate a profit and everybody else is here to support that means? Or do I have a worldview that says there is a bigger purpose, that people themselves are valuable? And if I'm going to do I want to build an organization where I find and align people with a purpose that's worthwhile and I help them become all they can be, and a byproduct of that will be a profitable business? Or is the profit first and the people are just cogs in a wheel to achieve that purpose? It changes the way you relate to people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see them now instead of just a means to an end. Now we see them in some cases, I guess, the end itself, right? We want to grow them.
Yeah. Well, and really, if you look at your life in its entirety, you start stepping back from, I worked for 40 years, but I live for 70, whatever, or whatever the ratio is. You begin to realize there were things more important than just the work period. And so that's what tells you that really the people are the end and the means. Business is just a way to take care of people. You take care of your customers and you take care of your employees. And so that's my personal view, that the Bible brings sort of this eternal view of life is the way to make wise decisions is to think long term. So I'm absolutely with you. And that's took me a long time because I'm a young, aggressive, high D CEO 40 some years ago. And it took me a long time to reprogram myself. And when I'm looking across the table and I'm struggling with the behavior or the performance of someone, how do I look at that person? And I finally learned to just have an open conversation and say, let's think about what is best for you. And be willing to do whatever's best. And sometimes that means, look, I think your skill set, et cetera, can be better satisfied somewhere else. And I'll pay you, I'll keep you on the payroll, but go find that something else, as opposed to saying, well, you're not doing the job, 2 weeks and you're out. It's just a different approach. Now, it took me a long time to grow into that, so I'm not critical of other people who have not grown into it. But that's the way I operate now. It took me a long time.
So how do we look at human resources, human capital? I mean, is it just human, full stop? Or how do we, because everything in corporate has to have a box or a name or whatever. I mean, how do we define that, Gary? Is there something that we
Well, we encourage leaders to grapple with that themselves and to think about it in their own terms. We all have a framework we're coming to the world with, and whether we identify it or not. Well, the biblical framework is that people are created in God's image, and they were actually designed to build and create things. The biblical language is have dominion over the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, and that's the language written years ago. But basically, it's a designer statement saying, look, I created humanity and I gave them certain attributes that allow them to do what I created them for. I'm an engineer, so you have requirements for a building, then you have a design for the building, and then you build the building. So design requirements were to not be victims, but be victors. We're supposed to win. That's what we're created for. And the Bible is really a litany, a long story about we're created to do this, but we didn't. And what's this journey we're going through to figure out what we were really created for and fulfill it? So in my case, the business world has been my laboratory for figuring this out, figuring out who I am, what I need, what the flaws in who I am are, and how to address those flaws. So I don't know I answered your question directly, but just thinking deeply about the bigger purpose in your life, then that helps you put your business in perspective.
Well, and it helps us also name things in the way that's most aligned with our purpose, as opposed to just giving them a name to give them a name.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I agree. And one of the biggest problems I see in organizations that really become transformed around purpose is it's not the creation of the purpose statement, it's the authenticity of that purpose in its leaders. Ooh. And so we can put all kinds of things on the wall and go through a little exercise to create a nice sounding things, but it really doesn't matter. It's what comes out of us. Do we literally think this way? And a lot of times it's easier to state something that is an aspiration about how we behave, and we're a long ways from behaving that way. And I found I just be honest about it. I just say, look, guys, this is the kind of leader I'd like to be. Frankly, I'm not there yet. But you can hold me accountable because this is what I want to be. People welcome that. They know none of us have it together.
Yeah, right. The emperors have no clothes. We know. Yeah,
we might as well admit it. And then they quit battling you and help you. Yeah. But if you pretend to be something you're not, then they're going to just try to tear you down everywhere you went. But if you say, look, I'm trying to do this and I don't know how, please help me, it totally changes the attitude.
Definitely. Well, we know that the only constant is change, Gary. So as the world continues to change, as business continues to change, how do you see the principles in your book continue to adapt and continue to remain relevant?
Well, we are in an interesting season right now. There's a growing awareness. I invested in a company recently that is providing what's called some call it chaplaincy, but there's a recognition in organizations that there's some kind of relationships that can be better provided to employees that don't come through HR or through the organization itself. So you can teach leaders to be good, to care for their people and ask, how's your kids, all this stuff. But there's some stuff that people won't tell you. They won't tell you they're struggling with a drug problem. They may not tell you they're having marital problems. They may not, whatever. Well, there's a growing awareness by big companies bigger companies that employees need some care that they're not getting. And that care is actually better provided from outside the organization. And what's interesting, I was talking to the guy that's providing these services. It's a new idea. It's being called soul care. It's not, it's the idea that people are more than their flesh and bones. There's something, regardless of faith, most people believe there's more to us than just our body. You know, whether it's Christian faith or you take it, Hindu, whatever, we tend to believe there's more to us than we can see and touch. Well, that's what soul care is about. And I asked him, I said, well, so what is it you're doing? And he said, well, basically, we're friends for hire.
Friends for hire, huh?
Yeah. And I mean, we laugh, but we have gotten to the point where with social media and then maybe the echo coming out of COVID, that we have more communication and less intimacy than we've ever had.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we don't really have relationships. We have tweets or we have posts, but we don't have relationships. And when I talk to the people that do this chaplaincy work or whatever, what's interesting about it is the old model. HR used to have models where they'd say, here's an 800 number if you have
an EAP.
Yeah. They never worked. I mean, you get like 1% penetration, maybe 2%. What's differently about the chaplaincy model is they invest in building a relationship before the problem occurs. Now, I mean, who do you go to in the middle of a problem? You go to somebody you already know and trust, and then they can add some value. You don't go to a stranger.
Right.
Yeah, and so this is an aha moment. It's very biblical, by the way, but it's an aha moment as leaders. You want to invest in your people and knowing them and building a relationship with them and building trust with them. Then when the problem occurs, and they will, absolutely will, there's a better chance that you can navigate that problem because of the trust relationship. And the chaplaincies add to that because they build relationships with people outside the organization. And then a drug problem or some severe private problem, they're willing to talk to them about it, where the EAPs don't work.
Wow.
So this is fairly new in the last 20 years. You know, you look at teen suicides are up, I forget, 400 or 500%, drug usage, where we have a lot of technology, but we're lonely and we don't have trusted relationships. And so I think COVID has accelerated that because we tended to isolate even more for a period of years. So, yeah.
Wow. That's so interesting. And it makes, like, when you lay it out like that, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anybody's ever talked about, at least not, they've not poured into me with that. That's a new idea to me. So I like that, Gary. I think that's really strong.
You know, it is interesting. Again, people may be tired of my biblical worldview, but the Bible basically says the greatest intimacy is not nakedness and sexuality. The greatest intimacy is when you understand my thoughts and I understand yours.
Yeah.
You know, that we can, when I speak words, they're coming from the inside of me. Right. And so we're having an exchange that is just incredibly open, way more than skin, and so trust is rooted in our ability to communicate openly with each other. So,
wow, that's so awesome. Well, before I ask you a couple last questions here, I want to encourage folks to get a copy of Built to Beat Chaos. It's a fantastic book. It's super full of information and insight that you can use to lead yourself, lead other people, and actually beat chaos, because we are built to beat chaos. You can go to leadfirst.ai. That's lead, FIRST.ai. Get to know Gary Harpst more. Get to know all the work behind his biblical principles with the organization, faith-driven leadership. Super interesting, great stuff here. So, Gary, other than buying your book, what's the first step that folks need to take to start their journey towards order and fulfillment?
Well, we have some free webinars out there that help you do what I'm going to say. You really need to sit down and answer some really basic questions. And we will set up meetings and lead you through this, or you can do it on your own. But the questions are, start with why, like that one book.
Simon Sinek.
Yeah, Simon Sinek. Why do I want to be in this business? Why does this business exist? What do I value? And I'm talking, it could be either the owner of the business or it could be a supervisor, a manager, but go through these really basic constitutional questions. Why, who do I serve? Who am I really serving here? I may have an internal customer, an external customer, but get clear in mind who you're serving. And then maybe list your core beliefs. These are core beliefs that guide who I am and what I am. And I encourage people to be open about it and invite others. It's okay if you believe something different. When you encourage people to pursue truth, that's what unifies us. You may have a different faith or whatever, but we both can agree that, look, we're on a journey to understand what is true and to live by it. That's what makes our lives better. When you don't live according to truth, you hurt yourself. And so I find I love talking with people that believe things differently than I am, but they're serious about pursuing that truth, because then I know they and I will converge someday. But if you pretend you believe something and do nothing about it, you're not going to converge on anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I love talking to people who believe different than I am, because if they're serious about it, because then they're learning and they can share something that, well, this doesn't work. I don't think that's true. And I can do the same. Well, here's what I've learned, and this does work and this doesn't. And I quit being adversaries. We're all on a journey for truth. And the Bible claims that it has some truth. Maybe you live by it and you find out.
That's awesome, Gary. That's really good. All right. So, friends, if you're listening in, if you're watching, go to leadfirst.ai, get a copy of Gary's book, Built to Beat Chaos, schedule some time, watch some webinars, and learn more about how you can lead yourself and others with chaos. Thanks so much, Gary.
Thank you, Phil. By the way, you're bringing some order out of chaos just with what you're doing here. Thank you.